Welcome back, fellow Fujians. This is the second part in our DPC Fuji learning experience. Today we are going to be covering the camera dials. We're going to be running through the aperture, how to set priority mode, shutter mode, aperture priority, as well as the front and back dials of the camera. So sharpen your pencils and let's get stuck in.
Warren, what I did like about this system was the use of the dials and the fact that everything is so easily accessible. I mean, can you just pass on that camera over here? I'd just like to hold it a bit. And I mean, everything is right here on your hands. It's a almost vintage looking camera, which is very funky for everybody, young people and us old guys as well. And you know what as I said, what I liked about it is the fact that almost everything can be accessed through a simple dial. And what's your take on it?
Donnie, I found that the dials and ergonomics of the camera to be one of the strong points. I love the fact that it's very visual. You can dial in your settings, your ISO, aperture and shutter speed before bringing the viewfinder up to your eye. And then the amount of dials that's available and customizable. You can really set the camera exactly the way you want it. So the advantage of that for me is I'm able to have my wedding set up a certain way and then have my portraiture or a corporate session set up in a different manner which suits me.
So let's look at P mode. How would you change to P mode? Let's start with the creative modes rather. You know, P for panic or program exposure, or what we simply refer to as professional. Some people really shoot permanently in P mode. I've got no problem with that. And then also aperture priority and shutter priority. And then I also realize that you have a specific time mode, and then also obviously B for bulb exposure. So we will be explaining these to our viewers, and thereafter how to shoot completely manual. So can you just run us through how to shoot in P mode?
Yes, sure.
Hi everyone, today we will be talking about all the most important dials on the Fuji X-T2. And I'll just give you a quick overview on all the most important exposure programs and how to and the role of each of the important dials. We will be covering some of these at a later stage in depth. And what I really liked about this particular system was just how easy it was. When I, for the first time, held the X-T2 camera in my hand, I virtually learned to use it within a half an hour. It took a bit longer to customize the menus and to find my own way of working with it, but I really find it an easy camera, and because basically all the important dials are right available on both hands. So if you would like to change the aperture sits right on the lens. Now we have here the 56mm f1.2 Fujinon, which is just an amazing lens at an affordable price, and I find it to be very sharp and fast. And if you'd like to change the aperture, you know, going from stopping down from f1.2 to f8 is as simply dialing in the aperture. And if I go to A, we are in auto aperture, obviously, then the camera decides the aperture for you. Now here on the left hand side is my ISO dial, and at the bottom is the drive dial. We will be talking about the drive dial at a later stage. On my right hand side is the shutter dial, and to the bottom of the shutter dial is the metering dial. We will be covering the metering dial later on in this session. And then on my right hand side is the exposure compensation. If you're shooting in the creative modes and you'd like to under and overexpose, it's as simply as just minus or plus. And then in the front is what we refer to as the front command dial, and in the back is the rear command dial. And both these buttons are customizable to change either your aperture or your shutter speed depending on your way of working with it. We will be covering the drive dial later, and as I said, in depth, and we will be talking about the focus system later in depth. So let me show you how to change to P mode on the Fuji X-T2. So as you already found out that the Fuji doesn't have a dedicated aperture priority, shutter priority and manual modes. you simply change to any one of these modes by finding the right combinations on the existing dials. So if you would like to switch over to P for panic or P for professional, as some people may call it, is simply find the A on your aperture ring, and then go to A on the shutter dial, and then you have the option to change your ISO, or even to go completely automatic by using auto ISO. So how to change to aperture priority is as simple as dialing in your preferred aperture, and then dialing in the shutter dial to A for auto, meaning the camera will now decide the shutter speed for you. And then you also have the option of changing the ISO yourself, or simply move to auto ISO, so the camera then will decide the ISO for you. If you would like to confirm whether you are in aperture priority or not, you will see that there will be an A appearing on the back of the LCD screen, and also looking through the viewfinder will appear an A. So setting to shutter priority on the X-T2 is as simple as dialing in the aperture to auto aperture on the aperture ring, and then dialing in your preferred shutter speed on the shutter dial. At this moment I've set it up to 125th of a second. Then again you have the option of changing your ISO on the ISO dial on the left hand side, or simply using auto ISO, where the camera will determine the ISO for you. I'm often asked if the Fuji will only allow you to change the shutter speed to 1/8000th of a second. You can obviously shoot longer by going to time mode. And I'm also asked whether you can only change the shutter speed in increments of full stops instead of increments of thirds, like with most other camera brands. You can indeed change the shutter speed with increments of thirds by simply using the rear command dial. So at this stage, for example, I'm set to a 500th of a second. As you can see, it's over there, and then I can change the shutter speed with increments of thirds by dialing to the left or to the right on the rear command dial. And then also you would like to verify whether you are indeed in shutter priority, which is then indicated by an S on the LCD screen. And there we go, you can see that I'm still have an S in the LCD screen in shooting mode, and then looking through the viewfinder will also appear an S in the viewfinder. One of the great advantages of the mirrorless system like the X-T2 is that when you look through the viewfinder or you look at the LCD screen, you know exactly whether your exposure is okay or whether it's too dark or too bright. And if you are shooting in any of the creative modes, like in program mode or aperture priority or shutter priority, and you're not happy with your exposure, you can simply brighten or darken the exposure using the exposure dial. So in this case, the exposure dial is set to 0, but if I would like to brighten up the exposure, I would simply dial in a plus value. If I would like to darken the exposure, I would simply dial in a minus value. So switching to auto ISO on the Fuji is as simple as dialing the ISO to A for auto ISO, meaning the camera now will decide the ISO for you. Now the Fuji comes with 3 auto settings, auto presets, which will allow you to set the minimum shutter speed and maximum ISO ratios. And let me just show you how to get there. To get there, I'm just going to go into the menu. So I press menu, and then I'm scrolling down to the shooting menu, which is indicated by the camera icon, and then using the right selector, I'm going in to that side of the menu, and then I'm going to scroll down to ISO auto setting. So in auto ISO setting, I'm using the right selector again to go in there, and we will be changing the auto 1 setting and make it a standard preset. So in this case, I use the right selector again, and as you can see that my default sensitivity is set to ISO 400, which I'm happy with. Normally I prefer just to leave my camera, if I do a lot of handheld work, I prefer to leave it on ISO 400. and the maximum sensitivity is set to ISO 800 and the minimum shutter speed set to 1/30th. So in other words, if the camera picks up that my shutter speed goes below 1/30th of a second, the camera will automatically push up the ISO up to ISO 800. Unfortunately, reaching ISO 800 and the shutter speed goes below that, you will end up having a blurry image because the camera will then automatically reduce the shutter speed again. So in our situation, I'm just going to set up an auto a one mode that I would typically use, and I will use a minimum shutter speed of 1/60th, which complies to the handheld rule, and then going to choose a maximum sensitivity of ISO 6400. Even though the Fuji is really good in handling noise, and I believe you can easily leave it on ISO 12800, will still do a good job in most situations. So to set the X-T2 to manual exposure is as simple as dialing in your preferred aperture via the aperture dial, dialing in your preferred ISO on the ISO dial, and dialing in your preferred shutter speed on the shutter dial. And again, if you're switching to auto ISO, it simply means the camera then will make the ISO decision for you. And then to verify whether you are in manual mode, there will appear an M on the back of the screen, and also on the live view screen, on the LCD screen, there will also appear an M, and then also through the viewfinder you'll be able to see an M inside. So metering on the X-T2 is really simple to set. You have this dedicated metering mode just below the shutter dial, and on the left hand side is spot metering, where the camera will simply read about 2% of the exposure at the center of the frame. And we would normally recommend using spot metering when shooting very bright objects against a dark background, or shooting dark objects against a brighter background. And then next to it is center weighted metering. Center weighted metering is where the camera's light meter will read the overall exposure across the frame, but will emphasize the center of the frame. So typically if you shoot very large objects and you want the camera to expose for that type of object, you would normally use center weighted metering. And next to center weighted metering is multimetering. Multimetering is basically the same mode than Canon's evaluative and Nikon's matrix modes. And it's my recommended default setting for most scenes. And multimetering is a very intelligent metering system where the camera will take the whole composition and the color into account, and obviously read the exposure across the frame, but put a bit more emphasis towards your focus points and your colors and the composition at the frame. And then the final metering mode is average mode, where the camera will basically read an average of the entire frame, and it's really recommended for landscape photographers, and if you're shooting subjects dressed in very bright or very dark clothing, and where you have consistent lighting throughout multiple shots, then I would recommend average metering.
I'm Warren James, Fuji ex-photographer. Thank you for watching this DPC Fuji learning experience. For more information on courses, visit dpc.co.za. I'd love to connect with you. Visit warrenjames.co.za. Thank you to Photon Lighting and Vanguard for supplying us the kit for this shoot. See you later.